Anatomy is a gateway science. You learn your anatomy and then eventually you're just kind of like, okay, but how does that work? Because anatomy is just honestly pointing at something and giving it a name. It's not that exciting of a science. But when you learn your anatomy, eventually you're gonna be like, well, how does that work? Well, that's physiology. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you fuel that? There's nutrition. How does it move? Oh, that's kinesiology and exercise science. How does it fall apart? That's pathology and disease. So when you start going through all of that, it's so powerful. It changes your perspective on literally everything about yourself. And then when you add the actual visual component, when you then all of a sudden, it's not just some intellectual thing that you read in a textbook, but you're actually seeing it. You don't need an instructor to teach you anything. It's something you are experiencing in real time. And it's something you go home and you're like, all right, well, I'm eating some chicken and rice tonight. You know, like it's like you start to just have real true understanding.
Justin, I feel like you might be the absolute best person in the world to ask this question. First off, have you ever seen the movie Jerry Maguire?
Of course, classic.
Yeah, there's a scene in the movie where Jerry and the little boy are spitting facts back at each other. I think they're on the way to the airport. And the boy is adamant that the human head weighs 8 pounds. As somebody that's probably held hundreds, if not thousands of human heads, is the boy accurate? And if not, what does the average human head weigh?
That is the best question I've ever been asked to start a conversation. I haven't weighed the head myself, but I feel like 8 pounds, and I know what you're talking about, right? Little blonde boy, glasses. I think 8 pounds is solid. I know the brain is about 3.5 pounds for males and about 3.2 pounds for females. There's the same amount of connections. It's just obviously females have on average less body mass, so it makes sense that that would actually work out. But when you add like soft tissue, when you add the skull, when you add all that, 8 pounds feels right. Whenever I've held a head,
pretty accurate, yeah.
Yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah, so the boy was definitely onto something. I think embedded in that answer there was men are in fact more intelligent than women. Is that what I heard you say as well?
You heard it here first, I guess. I mean, not really, not at all, but
Awesome, man. Well, all jokes aside, man, I thought that'd be a great way to kind of open up with a fun question here. But I want to dive into obviously what you guys are doing over there. With the Institute of Human Anatomy. I mean, you've gained this massive following. We will kind of dive into how all that started back in 2019. But you work with human cadavers. How did you get there? Like take us back to maybe kind of your origin story and how you ended up, dissecting, if that's even the right word, human dead bodies. Or dead human bodies.
It's unconventional, to say the least. Whenever I'm having a conversation with someone, that casual, just like, hey, what do you do? As soon as I mention what I do, the conversation goes a completely different direction than they were anticipating. And so, but, for me, it was an unconventional path to the unconventional job. So the Institute of Human Anatomy was actually started by Jonathan Benyon. Jonathan Benyon and his brother-in-law, Jeremy Jones. So Jonathan, if you ever watch the channel, Jonathan's my counterpart. I met Jonathan back when I was going to school, and he was actually my teacher at some point. And then I started actually being his teaching assistant. And so when he started the Institute of Human Anatomy, he needed a lab assistant, and so he ended up bringing me along. Honestly, I just kind of found myself in the right place at the right time, many different times, and to just kind of be there when this all started. So the Institute of Human Anatomy is a private human cadaver lab, and that is rare. Most cadaver labs are research-based, or they're part of like a university or something along those lines. So as far as we know, we're one of the only, if not the only, private cadaver lab doing what we do in the entire United States. And so basically, I'm just an anatomy teacher who just happened to be working at the Institute of Human Anatomy, and we were teaching professionals, healthcare professionals of all types. So EMTs, paramedics, anyone who didn't have access to a cadaver lab in a university setting was coming to our lab in our region. And it was fun, getting to teach them that way. So it was, I just end up going to school, meeting Jonathan. He starts the lab. He brings me along, and, he taught me how to dissect a little bit in those early days. But honestly, most of my understanding from anatomy came from just kind of like spending time with the cadavers myself. I had 24-hour access to the lab, and early in those days, it was single. I had no kids, had no responsibilities, and so I would spend a lot of time into the middle of the night, just textbooks everywhere, scalpels, hemostats, just kind of probing the bodies and learning from in a really, really raw way. So But yeah, I mean, it was more just kind of finding yourself in the right place, the right time, and then capitalizing off of that opportunity and just seeing where it goes.
Yeah, prior to the institute, did you have a background in anatomy, biology, human physiology? Like, is this is something that, I mean, even going back to like growing up as a boy, like something that you were fascinated with the human body?
I've always been a science nerd. I love science, have my entire life. But so it's if we were to go back really all the way, I actually was a terrible student. And so what ended up happening is when I was graduating high school, I didn't know what to do. And so I went into the military, as a lot of guys do. So I went into the United States Marine Corps. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, this is back in 2010, I had no idea I was going to do with my life, and so I ended up going to college because that's what you're supposed to do. And I couldn't, and I was actually struggling just with like some PTSD related stuff. I just couldn't focus, so I actually pulled out of college. I dropped out, and I was like, I got to figure out something to kind of like. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what was wrong. And I just happened to find myself. I know this is going to be surprising in massage therapy. Massage therapy, of all things, came out of left field. And my idea was I just came from Marine Corps infantry, 2 deployments to Iraq. I was like, maybe I need a little more something other than just this like hyper aggression to kind of calm me down because I was just way too you know, aggressive myself. And massage therapy seemed like this really strange choice, and the government was going to pay for it. So I ended up doing that and realizing there's a whole realm inside of massage therapy. I actually fell in love with it when I went to school and ended up working with professional athletes. I'm located in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so I would actually work up in Park City, Utah, which is a destination town. And I was working with Olympians, bobsledders. I say to the end of my days, bobsledders have like they're built like linebackers and their legs are just tree trunks. But I mean, I got to work with like the Japanese men's ski team. But it was weird. I literally never planned on doing massage therapy. Found myself just out of almost desperation looking for some kind of sabbatical. Thought that would be fun. Fell in love with it. But that's where I actually met Jonathan Benyon. He was my teacher at massage therapy school. So, I love science, always have loved science. In all honesty, I just kept finding myself in a position where I didn't need to necessarily go to your traditional school and background like you'd expect. I just kept finding myself in the right place at the right time.
Does that struggle? I think you find this with a lot of people that are, you probably would describe yourself as like alternative education based, right? Like in the work that you do, like it's outside of the traditional school approach. Do you think maybe some of the struggles that you had growing up in school drives your passion to bring the education that you do to the masses in kind of a unique way? Get back to the show in a second, guys, but real quick, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizers. Do you know if you're getting enough magnesium? Because 4 out of 5 Americans aren't. And that's a big problem because magnesium is involved in more than 300 biochemical reactions in your body. Today, I want to talk to you about the most common signs to look for that could indicate you're magnesium deficient. Listen carefully to the end because there's going to be a special offer happening at the end of this that could be exactly what you need. Are you irritable or anxious? Do you struggle with insomnia? Do you experience muscle cramps or twitches? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you sometimes constipated? There are dozens of symptoms of magnesium deficiency, but these are just a few of the most common ones. Now, here's what most people don't know. Taking just any magnesium supplement won't solve your problem because most supplements use the cheapest kinds that your body can't use or absorb. That's why I exclusively recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizer. It's the only full spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually use and absorb. All Biooptimizer supplements are the best in class, guys. I've been working with and using their products for over 7 years now. For some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund, no questions asked. They're so confident in this that they're going to offer a 365-day money back guarantee. Just go to biooptimizers.com/FrankRich. And in addition, we're going to give you a discount if you use code RICH10 for 10% off. Once again, guys, visit biooptimizers.com/FrankRich or click the link down there in the show notes and use code RICH10 to receive 10% off your order today.
I honestly, no, I know exactly what you mean. And I think personally that my detachment from the traditional educational system has been only beneficial for me because when you're used to we all know this. There's this regimented way to learn stuff. You go to school, you learn it this way, you take your test. Well, when I was able to detach from that and do self-learning, self-directed learning, figure out what I wanted to do, focus on this and that, I realized that I actually really enjoyed learning. So when all growing up, when I thought I didn't enjoy school, it was really that I just didn't really like school. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't like learning. I just didn't like sitting at that desk. And once I kind of was able to get away from that, I was able to learn at my own pace. But what's different about that is you don't learn about things sequentially. I learn a little bit here, then a little bit there, then a little bit here. And what happens is this kind of like really unique way you're putting information together. And so when I started teaching, I was really prepared for that. My method of teaching, I'm at my best when I have students who are just raising their hands and I'm just answering questions because it's very unorthodox. And I understand why school is formatted the way it is, but in modern times, and even in this for me was 2010, 2011, I realized that things had evolved to the point where you did not need traditional schooling. That hasn't always been the case, but I'm glad that it was the case because it worked perfectly for me. And I think it really suited me well to succeed in the ways that I have.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. And I've seen it play out in my own life as well. And it's interesting that we're here, because 2 episodes back, we had Matt Boudreau on, and Matt is a co-founder with Tim Kennedy of the Apogee Strong programs. And they're building alternative-based education schools. They're planning to launch 50 later this fall. And it's interesting because if you were to go back, 120 years into American society, the only thing that would be similar to today would be the education. Everything else has evolved, but the school system is still the same traditional school system that was literally a part of the Industrial Revolution. It was kind of set up as a way to create workers, whether we want to call them worker slaves or not. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole with you here today, but it's interesting that we're kind of having this conversation around the education. And I've definitely seen that play out in my life as well, because I saw school as like a game that you had to play, right? It's like, how do you kind of get the grades that are necessary to pass the classes? And it was like, once I figured that out, it's like I stopped learning. It was like, okay, now what do I need to do? But for me, running the podcast here for the last 5 years, I've been blessed and fortunate to bring on PhDs, experts like yourself, authors, people that are literally changing the world, that have topics that fascinate me. And I would argue that I have probably a master's level education in the things that I'm passionate about. And I would go up and push that against, anybody that went the traditional route in those areas. I missed out on maybe some of the basic education stuff, but it hasn't really prevented me back from, doing the things that I want to do in this world. So I definitely agree and align with that as well. It's interesting, your journey, you went from working with like the peak performance of human physiology. You mentioned Olympic athletes, bobsledders, and now you see kind of like people, I guess, at the end of life. Like, how did maybe some of that work of seeing the highest performing people in the world help or play a role in anything that you're experiencing and doing today with the Human Institute?
And again, Frank, that's a phenomenal question. So, you know, I have a few really interesting memories of. Actually, I'll stay with one. So I was in the lab. I was dissecting. I was dissecting the posterior thigh, so the hamstrings. And I remember as I was separating out the three hamstring muscles, I looked over my shoulder at the clock and realized I'm late or I'm about to be late and I got to go do a massage. So I hurry and put everything away and I sprint to go do it was, I'm literally catching the tram. I'm just doing whatever I can to get there. And I run into my session and I'm actually at this time I'm working with a professional cyclist. And all he wants is he looks at me, he's like, I want you to spend an hour working my hamstrings. This all in the span of 20 minutes went from dissecting hamstrings to now working with this professional cyclist because they also come and train in Park City because of all the mountains. It's really great. So like, your Tour de France type cyclists. And that was the best massage I've ever given for hamstrings because it's like, I knew exactly what they looked like. And I just spent several hours looking at like this, the most, I don't know, just the definition of those three hamstrings. It's interesting because that cadaver that I was working with was 69 years old, had passed from cancer. The body was in a state of atrophy. And now I'm working with a peak athlete again, all in there. And what's interesting is it's like you see the similarities, but you also start to understand the real obvious differences between health, malhealth, everything that goes with it. It's such a really interesting interplay that occurs. And that's happened so many times over my career where the bodies that I deal with, like you're saying, these are people at the end of their life, but they're also unhealthy. And so it's given me a complete different level of respect for health in general and just how the body is put together. And it's just interesting how it all works together, where you're learning the anatomy almost in a disease state, but you're trying to figure out how to help people optimize their health at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating, man. Truly, truly is. You said that all the people that all the cadavers are obviously they're dead, but unhealthy. Does that mean that there's no cadaver that just dies of natural causes and was like in peak physical state? Or is that something that's maybe sent to more your research based labs? Like, are you guys, because you're kind of privatized, only getting like, I don't want to say the bottom of the barrel because obviously the work that you're doing is truly important, but like, are you absent voided of getting like healthy cadavers, or is that not something that even ends up in labs like yours?
Another great question. So I think it's best to kind of give you some understanding of just how body donation works in general. If you say yes on your driver's license to be an organ donor, that's different than body donation. Full on body donation, you have to go through it's not that rigorous, but a far more rigorous process. But here's the thing. So let's say, someone's 45 years old, really healthy for a 45-year-old, and they die. And they die in a way that their body is not compromised. Because if you die from trauma, you can't be embalmed because then the cardiovascular system is compromised and the embalming fluids can't literally make it to the whole body. So in order to donate your body, you have to be essentially just brain dead. Everything else has to be completely optimized. But if you're 45 years old and you're in really good health, there's chances are your organs, there might be some harvestable organs that could go save a life. So what that means is anyone actually under the age of 55 for most body donation programs, if you die in a way that you could have donated your body, they're going to look at your organs first. And if your organs are harvestable, they will do that and save a life rather than let you donate your body. Because once they cut open your body, it's the same as it was with trauma. Once they say remove a kidney, your cardiovascular system is compromised now. You can't physically be embalmed. So what that means is when you see body donors, those are almost all people who are over the age of 55 who were diseased so that they couldn't donate their organs to actually save lives, if that makes sense. So when you're looking at the body donation community, it is essentially all diseased people and elderly. At the same time, there are few exceptions. There's one cadaver that we have in the lab. She was 95 years old and she died of natural causes. She was this tiny little petite woman. Her body, when you look inside of it, is the epitome of health. She looks fantastic, right? So you do see this happen every once in a while, but by far and large, most of the donors die of cancer, stroke, cardiovascular disease. All the stuff that you see people dying of is what the donors are also dying of. And that's just a product of how body donation and organ donation works.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. And I'm glad that they have those things set up in place, right? Because yeah, if all of a sudden you're a healthy 45-year-old man and you have these organs that can be, utilized, like you said, to save another life, it's like to give that to somebody that's going to kind of rip it apart and make some YouTube videos. Not that that's what you guys are doing, right? But I can understand it's like, yeah, save a life first, right? So how has seeing the tail end of these people's lives and how it's impacting the internal through all these diseases that you mentioned, like changed your view of how you live?
It's changed everything. It's changed absolutely everything. And I don't know how it couldn't. Whenever we have students come in the lab, you can just see it dawning on them to see this and hold this in your hands and just understand what real disease looks like and feels like. It's something you can't hide from. So I the way I always describe it is anatomy is a gateway science. It's like, it's almost like a gateway drug where it's like you learn your anatomy and then eventually you're just kind of like, okay, but how does that work? Because anatomy is just honestly pointing at something and giving it a name. So like, this is your hand, right? And the hand is made up of these muscles. It's not that exciting of a science. But when you learn your anatomy, eventually you're gonna be like, well, how does that work? Well, that's physiology. And then it's like, okay, well, how do you fuel that? There's nutrition. How does it move? Oh, that's kinesiology and exercise science. How does it fall apart? That's pathology and disease. So when you start going through all of that, it's so powerful. It changes your perspective on literally everything about yourself. And then when you add the actual visual component, When you then all of a sudden, it's not just some intellectual thing that you read in a textbook, but you're actually seeing it. So, for instance, the first time I saw real, true, excessive visceral fat of someone who was morbidly, no, I don't, I think technically they're morbidly obese, but that's another interesting little side note. You can't be too big and donate your body to science because then you physically can't fit on the embalming table and they can't fit you. So it's like there's an upper limit. So I remember I was looking at this donor and they were capped out. But the amount of visceral fat, when you open it up, you're just like, that's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. And it's something that you don't need a textbook. You don't need an instructor to teach you anything. It's something you are experiencing in real time. And it's something you go home and you're like, all right, well, I'm eating some chicken and rice tonight. Like it's like you start to just have real true understanding. I don't pretend to be perfect. I'm far from perfect in terms of like all of my health choices, but at the same time, I can tell you, you can no longer justify bad behavior and things of that nature, right? Like growing up, I knew fast food was bad for me, but I didn't really know how. Well, now I do. And now I've seen what those things do. And so now there's like this level of understanding that just it comes with the territory of seeing these things and doing what I do. You can't help but just hold yourself more accountable because you simply just know more.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You had mentioned your military service, and I think you even said you had two deployments. We've had a lot of high level military guys, and there's been a handful of them that have talked about the first time they saw a dead body, how it changed their life forever. Was that something that you were exposed to in your military service? And if not, how did seeing these dead bodies change your perspective of life, death, and just how you kind of approach your life?
So, I actually had a very unique experience. I joined in 2006, and that was technically I signed up in 2005 at the height of the Iraq War. But by the time I did my first deployment in 2007, basically the politics of the entire region of Iraq had changed. Where 2 months before I got to Iraq, it was absolute chaos, and then all of a sudden, now we were training the Iraqi police and all sorts of like the kinetics had just essentially disappeared. What was interesting about that is, so for me, it's like I never really got to experience combat, which is obviously a great thing. But as an infantry marine who had trained all that time, and then all of a sudden it doesn't happen, believe it or not, as strange as this may sound, that does a number to your mind as well. And so it's kind of like the way I liken it is it's almost as though you train for a job and you go through all the schooling, you do everything, and then you get there and they're like, oh, by the way, you're not doing that. You're like, wait a minute. And for us, it was really difficult. So I actually spent my 4 years, in hindsight, this is great. This is literally the best possible situation. But I spent those 4 years basically training the Iraqis to take over the country themselves. And so I never really got to see like combat or dead bodies of things like that nature, which again, great in hindsight. But at the time, for a 20-year-old kid, that was actually, believe it or not, it was hard. So, but what it did teach me though is, I mean, I spent a year and a half going outside the wire, mentally preparing myself. Like the way I and my friends we would prepare is we'd say, oh, you kind of like almost assume you're going to die, but you're going to do everything you can to make sure that doesn't happen. And you're going to protect your Marine to the left or right. So what happened is kind of like I kind of learned to accept my death in some way in the Marine Corps. But it wasn't until I started working with body donors that I really started to go, okay, I understand what mortality really is. I understand how this works. I understand how fragile life can be. So it all kind of works together, right? The going outside the wire constantly as a Marine, and then working with body donors, being constantly surrounded by death, even though it's not a very sad way, it's a very professional form of death, if that's even a thing. Um, it changes you. It changes your perspective on things. It changes just your approach to life. So for me, it's like this sounds morbid. I don't I don't view it as morbid though, but I kind of am always preparing myself to go at any moment. It's just I know that is going to happen, or it can happen rather. I do everything I can to not let that happen. I don't want that to happen, but at the same time, it's like I think I'm far more prepared for it than most people simply just because of the job itself and being constantly exposed to it. And I've taught a lot of EMTs, paramedics. Obviously, I know a lot of military guys. When you this is a very common thing, right? This is not just unique to those who work with body donors. It's people who are just in this kind of lifestyle where you are exposed to death frequently. It just changes your approach and just your understanding of it.
Yeah, well, I think the Greeks, I mean, knew this 2,500 plus years ago, right? Memento mori. Remember, you will die. Like how many people had that, tattooed, or they wear an emblem, or a bracelet that reminds themselves of it. And it is that reminder that we are mortal. We are here to for a short window of time, and it's on us to take advantage of every moment, because you never know when it's going to end. So with that kind of in mind, you mentioned, obviously this work has radically changed how you approach your life. What are some of the daily practices that you've either implemented into, call it maybe your routine, or how you kind of live your life to ensure that, to the best of your ability, that you're doing everything to extend the longevity of your life?
Yeah, it changes from time to time. It's like I can always improve upon my routines, but at the same time, I think the big ones that I have made massive shifts with, are prioritizing sleep, removing alcohol, always trying to move as much as I possibly can. Um, it's sometimes it's a little subtle. There's subtle things too, because I'm also super busy, but that's not to say like I don't have time for taking care of myself, because I do and I make that time. It's just that a lot of times it's also, I'm aware, like, it doesn't always have to be this massive thing, but I'm always trying to just, I think sleep and alcohol and movement in general are probably the three biggest things that I try to do as much as I possibly can. And, it's, and I can tell you, like, especially the sleep one, prioritizing my sleep has probably been one of the biggest things for me. And I'm a huge morning person. I know that's not everybody's thing, but, it's like I'm ready to go at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and just tuck in. And when I get a great night's sleep, it's really helped me just kind of be better, be more productive, and even just think better, teach better, and just do life better.
Yeah, I think everybody would understand that low or lack of sleep, short sleep, or even poor quality sleep is going to affect how you show up the next day. But internally, to our physiology, what is poor sleep or lack of sleep doing to the inside of the body?
You have to understand that sleep is how your body recharges. And so to get a little technical, when you sleep, there is something inside of your brain and your entire nervous system called the glymphatic system. People have probably heard of the lymphatic with an L. Glymphatic actually puts a G in front of that. The glymphatic system is more or less recently discovered in terms of like scientific timelines. It's a very recent thing, but essentially it's the brain is flooded with cerebrospinal fluid to help remove metabolites and help push them out and flush them out. Right? This is how your brain starts to recharge and start to actually feel better, because what happens is when you are thinking during the day, little tiny molecules called neurotransmitters are released. Well, they don't always get completely reuptaked, right? Or reuptook. That's probably the right way to do it. But during sleep, that is how you are going to completely refresh that system. But you have to understand, if your nervous system isn't operating at optimal levels, that is going to affect your kidneys. It's going to affect your liver. It's going to affect everything. And so what you can see, it's hard to say like, this is how 4 hours is going to affect, your kidney, or it's going to affect your pancreas. But what we can see is consistently, when you have less than 6 hours, obviously that's going to affect lifespan. It's going to affect your quality of life. The way, blood pressure is going to be affected. There's all sorts of things that are definitely affected. But I think the most obvious one is cognitive health. And when you don't have clear cognition, that's when mistakes are made. And those mistakes could be simple, as in just something you do at work, or it could be life threatening, especially if you're having a long commute to work. So, for me, it's not something I can always point to it on a cadaver and be like, oh, yeah, look at that. This person didn't get great sleep. As much as it's just, we all know, especially I think all of your listeners are going to understand. Look, we all know what we need to do to be healthy. It's just that sleep is one of those things. And it's something that I'm starting, and have been for a while, to be far less compromising on. It's more like, no, I'm going to take care of this. And it's been nothing but beneficial.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge for, a lot of driven, high performing, professionals and individuals. It's right. It's because it's like, well, if I can operate even to 80% on 4 hours, it's like, I can better use those 3 to 4 extra hours to like move the business forward, create, new content, work on new programs, like reach out. So it's like, but it's understanding, like you said, like in time, that slowing of the cognitive performance is going to catch up with you eventually. And I didn't know that it led to shortened lifespan, but this was great. I want to maybe get technical on these other two as well, because I'm sure those are clear things that you can see in the body. So you mentioned alcohol or something, like, have you completely removed it? If, and then with that, it's like, what does alcohol do to the brain, to the liver, to other internal organs? Not that we want to scare everybody away from having a drink every once in a while, but I think everybody knows that, hey, you shouldn't drink obsessively, but it's okay to have any alcohol. I'm asking a lot of questions here, but yeah, let's kind of unpack that in the same way that we did with the sleep.
So one of the most popular videos that we've ever done on the channel for Institute of Human Anatomy, the YouTube channel that is, was on alcohol. And I did it about 3 years ago. And I remember, like, at that time, I was actually drinking relatively heavily. Not like, I wouldn't say unhealthy, like I wasn't a problem, but at the same time, in hindsight, I'm like, man, that was actually probably a decent amount. And I remember in the research for that video, I was kind of like, oh my God, this is crazy. Everything that I was learning myself with it. Um, it really just depends. You have to ask yourself, what part of the body are we really looking at? Because alcohol is going to affect everything. I mean, literally everything, because once it gets into your bloodstream, it's going to course over everything. It's going to affect your cartilage. It's going to affect your muscles. It's going to affect your bone. It's going to affect your brain. So then the question is, well, how much? And under what context does that become worrisome? If I have a glass of wine, is that a problem? I think everyone understands binge drinking isn't healthy. So it's like, where is this line? And what's interesting is, in the couple years since I made that video, more data has come out that shows that there's essentially no safe level of alcohol consumption. Um, Now, okay, well, but how unsafe? And that's where things get a little harder to say. And again, it's not like you can't live life. It's not like you have to become some, just completely, isolate yourself in your room and just never do anything fun or interesting. At the same time, though, it's a literal poison. And so it's when it gets into your liver, the liver is going to actually convert it to a very toxic compound. And that toxic compound is what essentially is going to start making its way into your body to create hangovers, but it's going to interfere with muscle protein synthesis. So let's say you went to the gym, right? You got a good workout in. If you consume alcohol within 24 hours of that event, there is going to be some destruction of your gains and your protein synthesis. It's hard to pin down the exact number, but we do know that those who drink are not going to gain muscle as much as they would have. We see alcohol actually reduces the thickness of the gray matter in your brain. The gray matter is your consciousness, right? Like, that is like the cells of the brain is where you're operational. If that gets thinner, it shows a reduced amount of brain activity. So it's quite literal. It's not just like you feel sluggish. Literally, your brain is shrinking. Now, if you remove alcohol from your diet, that can start to go back, and it can go back very quickly. But you have to understand, like, I mean, it really becomes a question of which structure, because when the liver actually starts interacting with alcohol, not only does it make a toxic compound, it actually converts that alcohol to fat, a good amount of it, which is where you get fatty liver disease. So there's all sorts of things that it can interfere with. And then it starts to just become a question of which structure and how much are you drinking. At the same time, it's like a drink a week, which sounds like nothing. Is that going to be the end of the world? No. A drink a day is going to be worse than a drink of a week. And then you have to start playing this game. You have to look at your health. What are how's this affecting your blood pressure? I mean, like, there's so many things that go with it. And it's hard to give like this clear answer outside of, I think we all know it's bad. The question is, what other stuff are you doing around it that might mitigate the damage? I think that's important. I'm not telling people obviously to do anything. It's just saying, like, at the end of the day, I mean, you're literally swallowing poison and your body recognizes it. It's for me, it's like, I'm not really that old. I'm 36, but at the same time, I've gotten to this point where it's like, I have a little bit of alcohol. The next day I'm just destroyed. I'm just like, and I'm like, oh, they're great. My day's shot. And so for me, honestly, one of the biggest motivators to stop drinking alcohol was just, I wanted to be more productive. And another thing too, is I really enjoy reading at night. Like, I just love reading with a book, and I can't read if I've been having a drink, or if I do read, I can't remember it that well. So it doesn't even have to always be like this obscene focus on your body, as much as it might just be like, I mean, kind of feel terrible. I mean, honestly, afterwards.
Absolutely, man. No, I appreciate all that. And yeah, we're not here, prescribing or recommending people to do anything. I have you on here as somebody that is, an incredible expert and a resource for just knowledge that, it's hard for a lot of us to maybe understand by reading the research. So it's like, hey, bring you on. It's like you're gonna dissect all this research, right? And then you can kind of articulate it. And that's obviously your ability to do that is what's, made your guys social stuff just fly off the charts, right? Because you're able to take those complex ideas and break them down to where, dummy like myself or our audience out there can kind of understand a lot of these things. So I appreciate all that. I think for me, so in addition to the podcast, I run an addiction recovery company, specifically helping guys that struggle with pornography addiction. But we have a lot of guys that come to us, and it's like they've had other vices in their life. There's been weed, drugs, alcohol is a common one. And I think so many people accept the lie that it's like, well, if I want to have fun, then there's got to be drinks included. And I think that's such a limiting way to see your life. It's like if you can't go out and have fun with your friends or even have fun by yourself without there being alcohol involved, then there's deeper problems in your life that probably need to be addressed, right? So, I'm glad we kind of shared and went there. Is alcohol the most toxic and poisonous thing that people are putting in their body? How does it compare to fast food, processed food, Coca-Cola, sugar? Like, yeah, is alcohol at the top of the pyramid here?
It's a great question. It's hard to rank them. I almost wish we could, because then I think it'd be really easy from a communication standpoint. But at the same time, there are different metabolic pathways that are used in some cases with these different compounds. So it's like, even with fast food, is it like, is it McDonald's? Is it Taco Bell? Or like, what point do we stop calling it fast food? What kind of, so how we can kind of like, you can start teasing this out. And it's like, what I would say though is, if I were to just, like right now, just talking blanketly to everyone, I would probably put it at the top of the list of what most people are doing in terms of just how global health, what it's doing to your physical body, all over the body. I think alcohol is probably at the top or very near the top. But at the same time, it's like, I don't think we can properly rank like, okay, McDonald's double cheeseburger or, like, a drink of whiskey. It's hard to kind of compare them that directly, but if it's not good for you, it's definitely near the top.
Yeah, because it's impacting other things outside of just the metabolic function, like you said, right? Like how it's decreasing the brain. I don't think a cheeseburger is going to decrease the gray matter in your brain, and it's not getting into the bloodstream there as well. So, yeah, that's great. I think the third thing you said that's you've made changes in your life was movement. I think we can all understand that we probably move less than any time in human civilization. So, what happens to a body that stagnant, that is not moving, and somebody that's worked with the highest professional athletes that move for a living, right? Is there a prescription on recommended dose of moving per day? So yeah, what happens to us when we don't move metabolically, physiologically? Does it affect other areas of our life like the alcohol as well? And then yeah, kind of prescription on what optimal movement would be.
So absolutely great question. So your muscles respond, right? Your entire body is going to respond to conditioning, right? And conditioning can be, obviously highly variable depending on what you're doing. If your body is used to sitting down and sitting down for certain lengths of time, it's like getting outside of that, literally the muscles are shorter. And so you have to start lengthening them to their ideal, their optimal length, but you're going to have to physically pull them apart in some capacity. It's not like they're so tight that you're like trying to burst out of an egg or something like that. But at the same time, when we get to like the microscopic scale, the stretching and the feedback system that interacts with the nervous system can be really difficult to overcome for some people. So you have connective tissues that are going to tighten down. Um, and so it's like stagnation is going to literally just cause all of your body to essentially just tighten, right? You can literally think of it almost just like you're shriveling. And this is going to have dramatic effects on, your cardiovascular system. Something a lot of people don't understand is that blood gets back to your heart through your venous system, through veins. Well, veins aren't really muscular. Some of them are, but what that means is there's no pump to push the blood back to your heart. A lot of that movement comes from skeletal muscles. Just literally moving is what's going to help facilitate a lot of that. There's other things at play, fluid dynamics. It can get pretty tedious with the science, but at the same time, that's what's going to be happening is you're going to have some kind of effect with the cardiovascular system on there. So you're going to have a tightening down, you're going to have it affecting your blood pressure, but it's also going to affect your gut, your digestion, your urinary system. All of these things are impacted by connective tissue. And so if you are not really moving, everything's going to start tightening down and it's just going to reduce overall body function.
No, Justin, that's great, man. And I think it actually kind of leads me to, what I wanted to ask you next here. So I have a background in bodybuilding. I was somewhat of an overweight kid, kind of fell in love with the gym around 15, got into competitive sport of things. I'm 40 here today, and it's like, I feel so great, like no injuries. I honestly feel better than I did when I was 30. And when I was 30, I was chasing being the biggest human being I could ever be. But as we're kind of talking about this movement and the musculature and how that's kind of like playing a large portion of this, what role does physical development, resistance training, strength training play in overall health, longevity? I'm sure you see a lot of bodies that, like, you can tell that person never stepped foot into a gym or picked up a weight. So yeah, let's talk about strength resistance training here for a little bit.
It is probably one of, if not the, it's hard. Again, it's hard. That was pretty, it's so important. It's borderline the most important thing you can do for your health. It's that important because it only gets more difficult for protein synthesis to occur the older you get. So, it's not that you can't start going to the gym as you're older, say like if you start going when you're 40, but it's going to be so much more difficult to build the muscle that you really are going to need. And at this point, I say need. Earlier on in life, it is kind of more so just about, like it's obviously great for your health and all these things, but a lot of it, there's wiggle room because it's cool. It's fun. It's great. You look good. And I'm not saying those are things you shouldn't chase. I'm just saying like, it's not as important as it is when you get older, because when you get older, when we say longevity, it's not just like it's good for cardiovascular health, heart health. It's not that it's just good for that. It's literally good for saving your life. When you get older, slipping and falling, having the strength to grab something to prevent yourself from falling, just literally walking downstairs, like I know, and that sounds crazy. It's like, okay, well, I shouldn't be falling down the stairs when I'm 40. And it's like the same, you actually might, and you never know, your muscles can save you, but it's more likely to happen when you're 50, 60, 70, 80. And so the work you put in when you're 40, 30, 40, that only pays dividends if you continue on to the best of your ability later on in life. It's like, obviously you're not going to be bodybuilding when you're 80, but the bodybuilding and the routines and the work you've done is going to help you literally just be stronger in so many different ways, that is just going to be is going to be very helpful. But yes, it improves literally everything, even digestive health, right? Again, when you're focusing, say like on the core health, those types of things can even impact your ability to digest and say bowel movements properly. And those types of things can actually have downstream effects on colorectal health. I'm not saying you're saying like doing sit-ups prevents colon cancer, but at the same time, staying, having regular bowel movements is one of the best things you can do for your health. And it's amazing how much core health can actually help with that. And that those problems start to make themselves more apparent later on in life. So look, you don't have to be a bodybuilder, but going to the gym, slinging around some weights, resistance and strength training is about as close to the top of the list, if not the top of the list, the things you can do. And it's also just good for your mental health, right? Which is something that, I know a lot of people talk about, and I'm so glad it's being talked about. It's just like, quite literally, you just function better after a great amount of strength training and resistance training. So it is, I could sing its praises all day. It's just absolutely incredible for you. And you can tell with body donors when you see them. Again, it's hard because if you have cancer, you're obviously not going to be going to the gym every day. But at the same time, you can start seeing what looks like obvious avoidance at the gym over a lifetime. You can start seeing little things in people, especially like degenerated discs, back health. You can start seeing the impacts those have on people.
Probably even tendons and ligaments and stuff like that as well, right? Because those are going to strengthen through, a lot of functional, free weight based movements. That's strengthening of all that as well.
Absolutely. And bone health. But even just bone health. Like the physics. When you are lifting weights, you're literally sending electricity, right? It's electrochemical energy, but it's called the piezoelectric effect. When you put pressure on something, the electrons actually get smushed together, and that actually creates an electric current. And when you do that through bone, that causes it to strengthen itself. This is why if you start like, say, hitting the jumping rope, right? You're starting to jump rope, that constant kinetic bouncing and impact on the bone is actually through electricity telling the bone to reinforce itself and to become stronger. This goes with everything you do with strength training. So it's like, I mean, and that's important because if your bones become osteoporotic or porotic, like you have osteoporosis, that's how you fall and break a hip. That is how you just go down the stairs and literally just crack your tibia open. So it's so important.
No, Justin, I agree, 100% on, I think all of that. I'm glad you were kind of able to articulate a lot of that. I think it's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon that, calls muscle, the fountain of youth. Like, it obviously does a great job of changing our external. And that's why a lot of young men get into it early on. That was a driver for me, right? You want to look great. You want to, be able to pick up shakes and stuff like that. But for me, it's like, I've so grateful. And I tell all the young men that, I get to coach and mentor. It's like, spend your 20s literally building as much muscle as you possibly can. For one, it's probably going to be the best time for you to do it. You don't have as many responsibilities, and then it's going to carry with you for the remainder of your life. Like I said, man, and I'm not here to gloat myself, but it's like, I'm doing things at 40, the ability to jump on a 48, inch box. It's like, I love to play softball completely injury free. And I credit so much of it to the time that I spend in the gym. So yeah, that's incredible, man. I want to end here talking a little bit about the social media work that you guys have done. I think that's, the Institute is great, everything that you're doing, providing education, all of that. But I think one of the most impressive things is what you guys have been able to build socially with, I think it's close to 15, 16 million plus, maybe even closer to 20 at this point with what you have on TikTok. So how'd you guys get into the social media game? What was kind of the origin of that? And, walk us through kind of, the journey of scaling it, because I mean, it's impressive for anybody to build a massive following, but teaching anatomy to the masses, I think is something that is truly rare. So yeah, the origin, genesis, and then kind of walk us through the journey to get to where you are today.
So back in so for ever since the lab opened in 2013, there was always this understanding that we needed to go online, but that was mainly focused around coursework. Because if you're gonna we wanted to create online courses, and okay, well, you need to obviously be able to get that in front of people, and not just through ads and things like that. But that was pretty much all the understanding we had. But then what happened in 2019, early 2019, I lost my job teaching. I was teaching at this school. They shut their doors. And all of a sudden I was just like, man, I got to figure out something. And so I started doing side hustles that we all do, like, how can I make money right here, right now? I got a family. And I found digital marketing. This is 2019. This was really popular at the time. And I started learning about Instagram. I started learning about YouTube. And that's where I had this idea. I was like, I wonder if maybe we could start making just social media posts. Because up to this point, we really hadn't even had any discussions around that. And as I was learning social media, I figured maybe this would be interesting. And I had an idea of how we could pull it off. And so what happened is I got the blessing of Jonathan and Jeremy. Again, they're the owners of the lab, to pursue this, to figure out how we could kind of make content and put it online. And what ended up happening was I figured at this time, Instagram actually wasn't that great for video. It is now, but at this time, Instagram really was just pictures. But a student of mine, her name's Jory. I will sing her praises to the end of my times. She's like, hey, maybe you should do TikTok. And I'd heard about TikTok, but I wasn't really sold on it. And so I went and looked at TikTok and realized this is it. Long story short, I ended up contacting TikTok themselves, sending them a video. At this point, there are no educators on TikTok. There's no sign. TikTok at this point is really just prank videos and teens dancing.
Was it TikTok already, or was it still Musically? Because I know it was originally called Musically.
Yeah, it had recently, I think 6 months prior to this point is when they transitioned into TikTok. And so what ended up happening is I sent this video over and they got right back to me. And I jumped on the phone with TikTok themselves, with their growth and strategy team. And they were like, we want to have you on the platform. We have no one on here, essentially. At this time, they were really eager to get new creators on there. I ended up working with TikTok for about 6 months, trying to figure out how we could put cadavers online that wasn't going to be toxic or, harmful to children. Because at this time, their user base was essentially 12 and 13-year-olds. And so it was interesting. We figured that out. And in November 2019, I published the very first TikTok and it went viral overnight, millions of views, and then it just never stopped. So that's when all of a sudden the three of us, Jonathan, Jeremy, and myself, we all got together and we're like, okay, I guess we do social media now. And we started making YouTube videos, Instagram, and they all just started taking off. We were very fortunate because for, every other creator on the planet, there's this real grind. And for us, you know, it just wasn't like that. But at the same time, there was a lot of effort. The amount of effort that I put into figuring out how to do this in those initial stages. I mean, it was deserved, but at the same time, there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of just also being in the right place at the right time. Like even if we started making videos for TikTok today, it wouldn't have grown the way it did. And TikTok was able to help us grow on YouTube, to grow on Instagram. It all kind of worked together. And then during the pandemic, being one of the only biology and medicine creators on the entire platform of TikTok, TikTok also started pushing our videos out more because everyone was at home. And so it's like, it's just a lot. Sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time. But in probably about 2020, late 2020, early 2021 is when YouTube really took off. And that just kind of like, that was a whole other game because short form content is different than long form content. And before we know it, it's just, that's what you do. It's like you're making TikToks, Instagram posts, you're on Facebook, but you're making YouTube videos. They're getting millions upon millions of views. And it's just it's a crazy ride of just, okay, well, I mean, we're just anatomy teachers, but I guess now we teach all around the world. So it took us by surprise in a lot of ways, but it was also something we worked really hard to do. But at the end of the day, sometimes you're lucky.
Yeah, I mean, you even said it kind of at the beginning, right? With I think the initial or second question that I asked, it's like even getting into the institute is like right time, right place. 2019, like I don't even think I was aware. I had heard Gary Vee. I mean, he was really the only one that was ever really talking about Musically, and then TikTok. It wasn't something I kind of got into probably till 2021, maybe even early 2022. But there definitely had to be that role of you guys just being early adopters to it. Like you said, the only educational teachers out there, and I'm sure having the favor of TikTok on your side as well. Do you think that played a role? Like, were they actively pushing it, or were they just giving you insights of like, this is what we believe is going to work?
They were actually limiting it, because the problem was in those initial days, the exposure was so massive that even though they were trying to get the videos in front of the right people, again, not children or not, adolescents and teenagers, we wanted to get it more towards late end high school. It was too broad. And what happened is they actually had to update. I'm not necessarily claiming TikTok updated the entire app because of us, but after an update, our content got nuked almost, where we were getting around 20 to 30 million views per short. And now all of a sudden it was like 700,000. Still awesome, but it was like a pretty notable decrease. And so TikTok wasn't helping us as much as they were having to limit us because this content was just too successful. At that rate, I calculated it at one point. We were likely to get 100 million followers on TikTok within the first year, which would have made us the most popular. But at the same time, just because you have those numbers isn't necessarily beneficial for a community either, because that's just 100 million people. If we wanted to create a course, which was always our goal, who do we even send it to? So it really kind of started to become more of a vanity thing, just having all those followers. But it was still fantastic. It was still wonderful. But TikTok, it's crazy to say, TikTok wasn't helping as much as they were trying to slow things down.
I'm sure when the guy started, I think you said it was shortly after 2010, 2011, 2012 was when the Institute was founded. They never got into it to build a social media brand. So has the growth that you guys had, the success online with some of these platforms changed the trajectory of the business? And, are you guys still kind of at your core, like an institute that is educational resources for teachers, students, and other professionals, or has the growth of what has to be just a mass following changed the direction of the company?
The business model definitely changed, but it's not that it like stopped being one thing as much as just kind of obviously, like, I think when you see growth happening in one sector, it's like, okay, let's divert resources here more so than over here. And so what happened is obviously a huge shift towards social media occurred, but we never really stopped doing other things. And And that's still the case. But if you, the social media is definitely the largest aspect right now, but that's also in the midst of changing because we're starting to produce a lot of courses and things of that nature. So there's, but I think that's just natural. You know, if all of a sudden anybody starts experiencing a huge amount of change in one sector, it's like, all right, well, that's where we got to put our eyes on that and figure out what's going on with it. And especially with just, social media is the world these days. And so and it became part of the mission too. The mission was to educate as many people about their body as we possibly could. And all of a sudden, social media became the obvious way to do that.
A tool for that. Yeah. No, and I think what you're saying there is the ability to pivot and make changes, that's at the heart of entrepreneurship, right? It's like, what's the definition of an entrepreneur? The person that jumps out of the airplane and builds a parachute on the way down. And if you realize halfway down, like I have different tools than what I thought I was going to have from the beginning, it's like, okay, we're going to change the direction of the things that we're going. So that's truly incredible. To kind of wrap things up here, Justin, love for you to kind of point to the guys out there where they can connect with the Institute. Obviously, we'll have all your socials kind of plugged down there. Anything exciting and upcoming? You mentioned, coursework and stuff like that. Who's that for? Take a couple minutes and kind of, share with the guys where they can connect with you and the Institute out there. And we'll wrap it up with a few last minute questions.
Sure. So first and foremost, I actually want to plug something special I'm doing for myself these days. I'm starting my own kind of like passion project called the Dissection Room, where I have a Substack. I have a YouTube channel. I'm doing my own like one man podcast. It's where it's just me ranting into a camera, but it's called the Dissection Room. You can find it on YouTube, Substack. So definitely check that out. But Institute of Human Anatomy, we are on every single platform you can possibly imagine. And it's always the same, Institute of Human Anatomy. Courses, there's a whole slew of courses that are looking to come out. They're going to be ranging from like kind of casual, just like, hey, everybody, you want to learn about your body, to, oh, this course is going to be more geared towards this professional, say like an athletic trainer, for instance, or an esthetician, or some things like that. So you can always go to the website, instituteofhumananatomy.com, and that's where you'll be able to see everything that's going on and what we're doing. So yeah, Dissection Room for me, and then for us, you got Institute of Human Anatomy everywhere and anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And congrats on the new endeavor, man. Obviously you've succeeded in the social sphere. So, I'm sure that'll be a massive success, and we'll definitely make sure the guys get access to all of that. We'll have all the social links. We'll have your bio and everything plugged down there in the show notes for the guys. But, Justin, we love to end every episode here with the same and final question. Obviously, the title of our show is called The Superhuman Life. And for me, this has been, kind of a 5-year journey and exploration of, trying to define and understand what living, a superhuman life means to me. And, as a man of faith, I do believe that we're here for a purpose and calling, that every single one of us has something that we're supposed to be doing right now. And I think yours would probably be somewhere in the alternative education of teaching anatomy and physiology to the world. But I think it doesn't just stop there. Like, I think a lot of people just, there's a purpose for my life, but they stop the growth aspect of like, truly mastering that art. So for me, it's pairing those two. I'm here for a purpose, but I'm gonna do everything with my power to become a true master and expert at that. But as we end up today's conversation, Justin Cottle, how would you define living a superhuman life?
I love that question. That's a really great question. I remember when I was a kid, I used to think like if I could have a superpower, like, because we all do, like, what would be my superpower? But I was a nerd. You have to remember this. My superpower that I always wanted was the ability to understand anything as soon as I encountered the information. And then I used to like fantasize that I would go to like a library and just like start just pounding books, just making my way through. I remember this probably like as a 7-year-old. That was what I had. What it's kind of morphed into is, I think a superhuman life is really just being curious and maintaining curiosity and never really saying, oh, that's enough. What I don't mean is like, it's not that something can't be enough as much as, oh, but I also want to learn this. I want to learn that. I want to do this. I want to do that. I think curiosity is something that everyone should strive for because it's been nothing but beneficial for me in my life. And understanding things in the world around you is really empowering and something I think everyone can benefit from.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, man. And, I always say for me, like what this has really evolved into is conversation I get to have with amazing people from all over the world and, let my curiosity kind of drive, and I'm sure you kind of felt that. It's like we went a lot of different places. I didn't show up with pre-scripted questions. I had ideas of things I wanted to discuss, but this was very curiosity driven for me. So I love that answer. Justin, it's been an absolute honor, man. I really, really enjoyed this. Love what you guys are doing out there, guys. Make sure to connect with Justin, the Dissection Room. Check out the Institute of Human Anatomy across all the platforms. If you guys got value out of this episode, Make sure to rate, review, but more importantly, if some of your life needs to hear some of the things we unpacked here today, do us a favor and do them the blessing by sharing today's conversation. But for Justin Cottle, your host, Coach Frank Rich, love you guys. We'll see you in the next one.